All right, everybody. It is Steve, the Rogue Scholar. I'm tempting the fates here, gang. I'm bringing on a friend, a very good friend. Not only a good friend, but one of the biggest volunteers in the organization of Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. None other than our editor in chief and one of my top confidants in Virginia Cotts. So let me tell you a little bit about her before I bring her on. Virginia is an old school commie, going way back. She would call herself a Stalinist, and she has had a huge impact on uh, my process as I move further and further to the left. She's influenced me over the years, and her and I fight, we wrestle, we just work through issues like I think the left has to do as a whole. And that's kind of why I brought her on, because our discussions are where my learning comes from, not just from her, but with others. You have to forgive her. The weather and everything has given her a little bit of the sniffles, and it is definitely not her preferred awake time. So she is going way out of her way to be part of the show. So without further ado, let me bring on my guest, my friend, Virginia Cotts. Welcome to the show, Virginia.
Hi, Steve. The crack of 9 a.m.
Absolutely. I want to just tell everybody for the record. I mean, this episode is titled Incrementalism. Um, but really, we're in search of wins. We're in search of how would you identify a win? How can the left, the real left, not this kind of bourgeois centrist harm reduction pseudo left, but the quote unquote left, where we have no power in the political sphere. We have no one representing us in Congress or the Senate or in the White House. We have nobody at the local level, even as a dog catcher on Team Us, really. And, most people think that power is begat by, voting. And we spend a lot of these elections realizing that in order to make a dent and to help people understand the MMT framework we so frequently talk about, and now adding in the class analysis to our work, that the elections present us with an opportunity to educate. But I still see people saying, what do you want, Trump? Or, what is your plan? Or what's your solution? Or whatever. And the reality is that we're not in a position where we can answer the question of what our solution is per se, because the solution is in fact changing with the conditions that we're faced with each each of the challenges that we face as a whole. How do we collectively come up with answers? And the right wing clearly has a straight line. They just are anti this, anti that. They are angry, and many of them are the working class. And so, as a leftist, understanding that our struggle is class, I mean, we obviously are not class reductionists where we ignore intersectionality, but we are at a point where it gets icky because the right wing has somehow or another co-opted much of the working class. And they've used sad instances like xenophobia and, you know, bigotry of all varieties, scapegoating, which plays right into the capital order's control over the message. So I guess let's start with that right now. For those that don't know Virginia, go ahead and give folks just a short introduction to your history so they know why you're on the show with me.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, as Steve said, I call myself a Stalinist. That's mainly to be provocative, but I'm definitely a Leninist. I have been politically active since I was a teenager. I was 13 when Dr. King's March on Washington happened. I worked organizing against the war in Vietnam. I lived in Germany, and we went around to American army bases and organized. We put out newspapers. I studied. I've spent all my life working as an activist. I'm not particularly scholarly. I've forgotten more than I remember of the books I've read, and I even read Capital Volume 1. Forgotten everything, but one other thing: when I went to Paris in 1968, I was right out of high school, and there was a general strike. Some between 67 and 68, general strike, students, workers, the city was closed down. The newspapers were full of alarmed reports about the President Charles de Gaulle, making plans to sneak out of the city and get out of France because he felt endangered. So I was at a very impressionable age, and that told me that we can be successful, that activism, especially labor, can be successful. And I've been trying to find that again for the past half century.
Well, we've been doing Real Progressives now, and forgive the title, but we've been doing Real Progressives now since before Bernie Sanders actually announced that he was going to run for president. And it was all in support of modern monetary theory and Stephanie Kelton in particular, which is what put us over the edge with that. But over the course of, I don't know, 2015 to talking what, 8 years?
Yeah.
And within that 8 years, we've seen a lot of people learn the fundamental idea that federal taxes don't fund spending, and that, we're getting an understanding of money and how money works. But we've struggled big time in bridging that gap with socialists and communists and others that, view the world through a different lens. And as a result of that, the ability to make the kind of changes that we're looking for leave us frequently talking to, unfortunately, in some ways, it is what it is in others, with centrists and with pseudo leftist progressives, if you will, the Bernie Sanders types, and so forth, folks that looked at FDR as a guiding light of a bastion of goodness and so forth. But we've noticed that there's no real power in the electoral process. You go through each election and there's a deluge of people talking about harm reduction, talking about you got to vote blue no matter who because the GOP is so bad. And it's become so overwhelming, the loudness, the voices, the whatever, that it's almost impossible to gauge. How would you even know if you were making progress, and progress toward what? What is the goal? What are you trying to achieve? And it feels like a bunch of chickens with their heads cut off, running in circles, spinning around in a teacup, and really making nothing, while we watch, things like the Roe v. Wade be destroyed, and we watch more wars occur, and we watch as they continually mock the idea of healthcare for all because people don't understand the money story. Because they don't understand the money story, they play into the capital's, existing lie that keeps us from having nice things. Help me understand what would be a win. What would be a goal, if you will? It doesn't need to be quote unquote revolution or not. Just in general, at the end, what are we looking to achieve? What is the left? What would you say the left needs to be looking to achieve?
Well, Steve, I can't speak for the left because I don't know who they are, but what we want is for people to be taken care of. We want people to feel secure, to have a comfortable life, to have time to spend with their families. So in other words, so their work week is a reasonable one. We want people to not have to worry about healthcare, to not be drowning in debt, to be able to study if they want to be able to have a job if they want to. That's what we want. I mean, I've always said if capitalism can make that happen, I won't say anything. I'll shut up. But I just don't believe it can. I don't believe it can.
Well, I look like I mean, I'm not going to share a bunch of this stuff, but I wake up every morning to an inbox filled with walls of texts from people that are heartfelt, meaning, deep thinkers, people that are pondering all sorts of things. And it always comes back to harm reduction. They view this idea of just vote blue no matter who as an ends to itself, and it doesn't matter if they do any better because the other side will do worse. So it's always a empty demand. It's always just a very, very much short-circuited process where they ignore everything that matters, that you can survive, that you can eat, that you have health care or whatever, and then they boil it into, but what about the gay people? And then it just stops right there, because after all, the right wing hates the gays. So, they get eked out about the butt sex and stuff like that. And so we have to deal with a nonstop, it's not even decrementing. It's literally like a full scale capitulation to this lesser evilism. And I'm on record countless times saying we cannot vote our way out of this. I don't see there's no path that I've seen, no plan that anybody's tried to sell me on that in any way, shape, or form looks like progress. And each time I hear it, I mean, I remember back during Bernie Sanders part 1, we would be on these 8, 9, 10-hour conference calls talking about how we could take over the Democratic Party. And I've watched people stand up and beat their chest saying, of course we can take over the Democratic Party. And nothing happens there. Even when they quote unquote take over the party folds itself back over itself and self-heals. It's as if nothing happened. Every single progressive movement, every single leftist movement, the Democrats have co-opted. They roll it under and they kill it. I've never once seen evidence that Democrats produce these great things that they're talking. Now, maybe at some point in the past, somebody can point to something and say, well, there was a time. I don't see any of that and haven't seen it. And I'm 54 years old, have not seen any of that. And you look, and Biden is even right now celebrating deficit reduction. And the paternalists out there are saying, us sensible Democrats had to, of course, rescue the day. Us sensible Democrats. And so you're stuck in this boat that if you don't go along to get along, you're not sensible, you're not reasonable. After all, we live in a duopoly. What else could you possibly do? Let me throw that to you. Obviously, I think we share a common belief that we can't vote our way out of this. What do you think that looks like? I mean, how would you talk to what I'll term a normie that suddenly tries to get you to forget everything you know, flush everything you know, and just vote blue no matter who? What would you say to them?
As you were talking, I was thinking about a woman I know who's my age, who was arguing that we had to vote for Biden, whatever, because of Trump. And I said, what does the Democratic Party stand for? And she said, well, civil rights, labor movement, equality. She named all these things. And I said, well, really, what is it that they do that tells you all this? And then, of course, she backtracked. And she was either speaking from memory, or she was speaking from wishful thinking or brainwashing, or a little bit of both. The last progressive thing I remember Congress doing was we had the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Act. We had, a few things back then. And the last thing I remember was OSHA, or the Environmental Protective Agency. That was in the 70s. I don't remember anything major since then. We should have
Correct me if I'm
healthcare.
wrong here, but didn't the EPA get passed by one tricky dick? I mean, wasn't that Richard Nixon's baby? If I'm not mistaken, he may very well have been a Republican, which is très bizarre, huh? Très bizarre. But
Was he?
I mean, what do we do here? I mean, like to me, a lot has happened since Richard
Mhm,
Nixon. Let's be fair.
mhm,
We lost the Bretton Woods Accord. Lost. We
mhm,
got rid of the Bretton
mhm,
Woods Accord. We're
mhm,
now on a free floating fiat currency. So that was a huge change right there in 72. Then, of course, people still celebrate Jimmy Carter, but we've already observed through our interactions
mhm,
with others, historian Harvey Kay in particular, which I was shocked said
mhm,
this, because Harvey tends to be very much friendly to the FDR wing of the Democratic Party.
mhm.
But Harvey came right out and said flat out, the king of austerity, everybody wants to point at Reagan.
Carter.
It started with Jimmy fucking Carter. And unfortunately, the paternalists out there will once again try to lecture us in a condescending fashion that Jimmy was the greatest. He had freaking solar panels on the White House. What do you mean? He's great as God. The Lord Jesus Christ himself can't touch Jimmy Carter as he builds more houses for Habitat for Humanity. But in reality, Jimmy Carter was literally the king of austerity. He was the one that started getting everybody to wear the sweaters and tighten up your belt buckles, and we've got to consume less and blah blah blah. What do you I mean, like, there is a missing piece here. The narrative that I hear from Democrats does not resonate with me. It
Doesn't.
doesn't work for me at all. It's like counterfactual. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on the Democratic Party as a vehicle for change?
Well, obviously, I don't. I believe both parties are the parties of Wall Street, and that's. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't see the transformation happen, but you know that as well. We we've privatized everything. Why do I say we? The government has privatized everything, including money, including government. Everything is privatized. But you and I talk about this a lot. We don't know. In terms of political activism, we don't know what's going to be successful. You know, it's it's like it's like electing one president could cause a chain reaction internationally, domestically. We don't know, but that's something that's so outside of our control. The best thing about political elections is it's a time that you can talk to people because people are focused on politics. That's a good thing and a bad thing, but that's the only value I can see. Um, I support people who get involved in local campaigns. We know that local leaders can make a difference temporarily. Money for women's shelters, things like that. But in terms of the kinds of changes we need, Congress isn't going to do that. And yet, everybody looks to Congress when they think about politics. They don't, it, and I shouldn't say everybody, there's some very, very good people out there with solid class analysis. But the noise seems to be from people who believe Congress equals politics.
Yeah, I think to myself, I went out there on Twitter earlier, which is a dangerous place to be if you want to keep your sanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to mention her name, but one of the friends of, our friends of friends, so to speak, was busy out there saying, because now obviously, with Cornell West throwing his hat in the ring, um, there's a lot of folks out there who have a very negative feeling for Nick Branya and the movement for a People's Party. And there's a lot of people that were very excited about being a part of that, only to find themselves used up and thrown out the door and no longer part of that world. And I would be one of them. But this individual was busy shaming everybody, saying, hey, I used to beat the drum for third parties, and I don't beat the drum for any, because I believe the
Right.
electoral process is controlled by the duopoly, by the corporate powers, the oligopoly that we live in. And to ignore that is just absolutely, to me, the most disingenuous form of gaslighting you can do. But this individual who has a platform of her own running around beating everyone over the head saying, hey, I used to support Democrats, but there's real harm reduction that we can do by voting for Biden. And we're looking at it and I'm saying, gosh, it's June 9th, 2023. Is this going to be another 18-month campaign cycle? And what I don't think they understand is that guys like Trump, I tried to talk to a lot of our friends about the concept of attacking Donnie Tiny Hands and Donnie the Connie and all the other stupid, worthless stuff that you saw the Vote Blue sycophants push out there. And it was like a nonstop diversion from a Green New Deal. It was a nonstop diversion from talking about existential climate crisis. It was a nonstop diversion. And I mean, friends of ours even were like, no, we've got to go after Trump. We must go after him. But it's never gone away. He's been impeached twice and he's more popular than ever. Impeached twice and more popular than ever. That should tell you something. But instead, these brainiacs, these freaking geniuses are busy selling. We got to go after Donnie Tiny Hands, Don the Con, Putin puppets, and all the other lesser specimen type statements that come out there that distract and destroy and are worthless. I'm curious, why is it that we're always in the process of trying to rip down the other as opposed to posit a positive vision for what we would want to see and build toward that? Like, I'm on record saying we need to build parallel systems. I'm on record saying you can't vote your way there. I'm on record saying what I believe needs to happen. But when I hear them, instead of putting the thing out there that we can feed the homeless, that we can bring in brothers and sisters that are immigrating to the U.S., whether illegally or legally, whatever, because they're trying to escape oppression elsewhere. But they're coming to the king of oppression in the United States, and yet somehow or another, it doesn't make sense. I guess my question to you is, why is it that we spend all of our time allowing the quote unquote right to define the terms of engagement instead of the quote unquote working class or the left defining what we think needs to? It seems like it's always the other way, always that way. I haven't seen any difference.
Don't you think it's they're the ones in power? They're the ones who have controlled the culture, the education, the media. So it's a miracle that we're able to think any other way. I mean, we always laugh about that the Democrats and Republicans are like two sports teams. It's like the Yankees and the Sox. It's people, and in my lifetime, I've seen the Democrats completely flip. One day they were into spending money on a strong social safety net. The next day they were boasting about fiscal conservatism. How did so many people change their beliefs? One day the Democrats were very opposed to the CIA, the deep state. The next day they're supporting it. Because Trump, well, you know what I'm saying. But the other thing about this particular election, am I supposed to believe that if only we can get Biden in, something good is going to happen? Who's the president right now?
Biden, I think.
Who's been? Yeah. So. But the other thing, Steve, is in addition to existential climate crisis, there's also the threat of nuclear war. We have this huge imperial monster taking over the world, assassinating leaders whenever they don't follow America's bidding. Trump is actually more anti-war than Biden. So who am I to say that one of those two assholes is better than the other? I can't make that up.
Well, here's what I see. And it's very surface level, but it's a real thing, right? when you walk into a place and everybody acts a certain way, it creates the environment that builds upon that thing, whatever that affect is. And if you're anti-gay and lesbian and you come in there and you feel free to just talk about screw the gays and F them and screw
Mhm.
whatever.
Mhm.
And you have the ability to build that herd mentality.
Mhm.
And that herd mentality, when graced with the legitimacy of government putting its hand on those people, creates yet again another force of evil, if you will. So there's a harm mitigation that comes in there. I don't think that that's something you can vote your way there, though, if that makes sense, right? I think that the issue is deeper than that, right? The reason why these things resonate with people, and the only reason it resonates with people,
Mhm.
is because I believe austerity is being used as a tool,
Right.
that they think you're taking something from them. They
Mhm.
think that you're taking, whatever place in society they had and replacing it with immigrants, or taking whatever place they had in society and replacing it with trans people, or
Mhm.
taking their place and you're taking their job, you're taking their house, you're taking their wives, whatever it is, right? You're taking something from them.
Mhm.
They can't understand that if the government creates it out of thin air, it's not coming from you.
Mhm.
And so it's that fundamental
Mhm.
delta there. But by allowing that to take place, it gives rise to all those bigoted things that the superficial Democrats use and say, see, they're against it. And we got to fight back. We got to save society from this.
Mhm.
But yet the Democrats are busy celebrating right now Biden's deficit reduction.
Right.
They're busy celebrating austerity that created it to begin with.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
vast majority of voters and the vast majority of activists and the vast majority of alt media are recalcitrantly unwilling to learn the
Mhm.
economics that would
Mhm.
open their eyes up to see this thing. Help me, I guess, understand, what do you think the barrier is? We're all propagandized. I get it
Mhm.
completely.
Mhm.
But what do you think the barrier is to these groups understanding the economics? Why do you think their
Yeah.
ears are tuned out and shut down and they just bring Richard Wolff on to talk about how the government borrows from corporations? Jesus Christ on a half shell. What the
I
hell?
know.
People
I
listen to
know.
that trash.
I know. It, it but this is the $1,000,000 question. I mean, this is what we're trying to do at Real Progressives. I found Real Progressives because as a Marxist, I realized that my understanding of the economy was pretty weak. And I was literally just flipping around YouTube and I came upon you talking with Rowan, I believe. And it was so weird and so wrong, but you both sounded like you really believed it and you had a handle on it. And so I had to learn more before I rejected it. And that's how I came across MMT. But it goes against everything people believe. You need money in order to buy. I need money before I can buy a car. I need money before I can take out a mortgage. Why would the federal government be different? And that's the big leap, that the federal government is indeed different. But they have people so confused. I've been talking with people who believe, yes, but when the economy is in trouble, that's when you can't print too much money. That's when China stops loaning us, because China for some reason is going to stop needing dollars tomorrow. I don't know why, but yeah, but the, it's so confusing, and yet it fits the narrative, and so that it's so much easier than making this leap to MMT. But you have managed to teach an awful lot of people, Steve. There are a lot of people who just accept the basic tenets of MMT, people who will never study it, but it's come to make sense. I think it's repetition, for one thing. You just hear it enough, it doesn't sound crazy anymore.
Just real quickly, I got a long set of texts, and I'm sorry that I'm not sharing them with you all, but they're private but they're important. And long string of texts basically saying, hey, you hear the term degrowth, you hear the term MMT, and you know these things to be true, but what do you do with it? How do you make any of this happen? Steve, how does this go from just being a really cool thing you talk about in your podcasts to it being a really cool thing that we do for society? How do we save ourselves? I've got children. How do we save ourselves from the coming climate crisis when so many people are busy out there distracting people? How do we get the focus on the thing that will save us all? How do we do that? And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that. I mean, I have an approach, I have an idea. I've laid it out in different podcasts and different episodes of this show, Rogue Scholar. But in fairness, though, everybody's always looking for a finished product. Nobody's coming at the base and saying, hey, let's talk about this and let's make it happen. Everybody's like, oh, you guys don't have all that stuff. Oh, I can't just run out to the protest with a sign in my hand. Oh, well, I'm bored. I'm moving on to somewhere more exciting. And so they dart off to somebody that's going to run and scream in the streets, achieving precisely zero, by the way.
Yeah.
Precisely nuts. Nothing. Nada. And yet at the same time, though, they qualify just getting in the streets as somehow or another progress. How do we define progress? I know you say you're not the left, or who is the left, or whatever, but just from your perspective, presenting it as if you are carrying the weight of the left momentarily, what would you tell somebody who thinks that the answer is just simply general strike? We'll take to the streets. Well, you have some very nuanced understandings of these things. We've talked at length. We both chuckle a little bit because what else are we going to do? Tell me about your position on just take to the streets and general strike and so forth. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, again, I don't know. There is a role for demonstrations. It encourages people. It excites them. The problem is you have to be very careful. This is that whole question of reform or revolution that you if you're and I think demonstrations kind of fall into that. It always has to be reform, and it always has to be more than just whatever this immediate issue is. I mean, let's imagine that we got single payer health care by some miracle. We got it. Then what do? We succeeded. Our little demonstrations worked. And then do we all go home and say, okay, things are fine? You have to keep going. And when you don't succeed, you have to also keep going. And mostly we don't succeed. But I see all of these as education. For me, education is everything. And I'm more and more convinced that people need an understanding of capitalism, need an understanding of how power works, of class. And I know it sounds stupid to use those words because people turn off, they're buzzwords. I don't know how to express, I'm not smart enough to express these things in a more clever way. But I think education is everything. And that's what ultimately you're doing, Steve. We talk about activism, we get involved in various events, but we always go back to macro and cheese, to who we're going to interview, to doing the things I like to do, which is produce webinars or book clubs, but talking and figuring it out.
Okay, Virginia, keep that thought going. I got a call coming through.
Okay. Oh, shit. I can't believe he left me here panicking. Okay. So now when I was a young revolutionary, a young Bolshevik, we used to literally get into fistfights with the others. So the Communist Party people would get into fights with the Maoists, would get into fights with I'm talking little roving bands in the street, beating each other up. The anarchists, the Maoists, the Trotskyists. How crazy is that? there are so few of us, we can't afford that. So earlier I always say I'm a Stalinist to kind of be provocative, but my message there is I don't criticize. I don't criticize those things anymore. I don't criticize the Soviet Union or China. It's like we have too much to do here. We are not on the verge of putting together the revolutionary government, putting together the Soviet. Then we can start arguing about those distinctions. But I think right now we still have everybody believing, or too many people believing, that Congress equals politics and vice versa. We have too many people who don't understand power. And for me, that's the core, understanding power. And as MMTers, one of the things that we're at Real Progressives that we're struggling with is combining those two things. There's some great people out there with great analysis of sort of big picture stuff of imperialism, but they aren't necessarily MMTers. And we have an MMT community that often stays very much in a fairly narrow lane. And so we're trying to kind of weave it together. And I don't have the answer. And one of the things I love about Steve is he's willing to say he doesn't have the answer too, that he's still learning. Oh, I said something nice about you, Steve.
I know. I heard.
Sorry.
I was like, wait, hold on. Look, I want some. I want some more shrooms. I want some of that.
I'm from the love generation. What can you say?
Well, so I want to fill people in because you're one of the few people I actually broke my code of silence when I went to the Dead show the other day. I had an existential experience that day. I really did. It changed me, fundamentally changed me. And I haven't been able to figure out how to unchange me. But there was a part of me that kept striving to be accepted by people that I don't really care if they accept me or not. I mean, I do on the surface care, but in reality, I don't care. And I keep wondering why there's a clash, why there's this dissonance, right? Like a tuning fork out of tune. You go, you want to bring it into where it's, and I realized that I was trying to fit into something that I had outgrown, or that I knew was not, that I experientially knew was not true, or that wasn't important. And I sat there at that show, quiet as a mouse. I didn't dance. I sat in a chair. I belonged. I sat there and I belonged. I didn't try to get praise. I didn't try to get anyone's approval. And I felt perfectly content in that moment, that it was okay to be me. It was okay to be myself. And I think that people as a whole, if they can find a way to be okay within themselves and identify what it is that they need in this world, what it is that they understand about the struggles they're dealing with, and not worry about someone else's approval of whether their struggle is legitimate or whether their struggle is the right struggle, and talk to people and just sort of work it out. I called you, or met, and it was like straight up, it was just genuinely like, I'm living my best life for this moment right here, right now. I wasn't 5 feet ahead. I wasn't 5 feet behind. I was right where my feet were. And I was right there in that moment. And this may seem unrelated, but I don't believe it is. I think we're so eager to find out what other people think. We're so concerned about what their priority is. We're so concerned about winning them over. And then we end up fighting when we can't win them over, and instead, you know, the idea of owning your truth, owning your existence, and prioritizing what you've seen, what you've experienced, and paying attention to the struggle of others, and seeing the world not so much in a us versus them mode, but allowing yourself to just exist. And it sounds a little corny probably, but this genuinely, to me, was a game changer. And by the way, before anybody asks, sober as a judge, there wasn't any tripping or anything like that that brought this about. I just had gotten to a point where if you'd have stuck me with a pin, I would have exploded. I was under so much pressure to try to give a flying fuck about supporting the left on social media, on Twitter. Why don't they retweet me? Or why aren't they watching the videos? Or why aren't they listening to our podcast? It was so much pressure to try to solve a problem that I had no control over. Your opinion of me is none of my business. That was the big thing. Your opinion of me is none of my business. My opinion of me is. And if I don't think that my thoughts are worthwhile, if I'm not giving myself credit for being able to take action, for being able to do something, I'm always going to be a bystander in this political process. And that was the wake up. Even though I'm doing things, I'm a human doing, I'd stop being a human being. And by putting this stuff in its proper context, I was able to, I don't know, I was able to break free. I don't give a flying fuck about the elites judging me or liking me or worrying about my cussing or worrying. I genuinely let go of it. And I also, I felt free. I felt loose. I felt like I was able to absorb new information because I had filled up so much of my mental capacity worrying about pleasing others, worry about fitting in to what the left was. Well, it was the same at the Dead show, the Dead and Company. Okay. There is like people, if you look at the old videos, now I've been doing this for a long time. It's not something new. I've been to a bunch of Dead shows. So it was sort of part of me. I listen to it all the time. Pretty much every show you see me do on RP, you see me have a Dead shirt or so. I'm always in tie dyes. I've been this forever, but there was a part of me that was like, do I fit? Does it fucking matter? I belong there. I belong wherever I want, wherever my feet are. And I think that we as people need to get a hold of that so that we take agency for ourselves and we don't think somebody else is going to do it for us, that we don't think somebody else is going to be the one that gives us the answer, that we feel empowered enough to be part of the solution and take action. And to me, I go back to that interview I did with Michael Albert a couple of years back, the anarchist. And when we talked about how do we get people to be decision makers or to work in these environments when they've forsaken and they're gaslit and they have been oppressed to the point where they lost the capability of thinking, lost the capability of putting one foot in front of the other. And they're always the person at the dance standing along the wall watching the others do the do. And I just, he didn't have an answer for me. He was like, it's going to take time. There's just no getting around it. People have been put in this kind of role for so long that they don't feel like they have anything of value to add. And I am here to tell you that that's not true. And I know it's not true. And I think that was the fundamental change, was the reality that I don't need, just because I am in the MMT community, I don't require, and I love them all, but I don't require their approval. I don't require their approval. I'm going to do what I feel led to do. I'm going to work with people that I have a shared common belief with, and I'm going to continue putting one foot in front of the other. It was a tremendous burden to try to please people that clearly I was not pleasing. And it kept me from being effective in ways that I feel like I'm gifted at. What are your thoughts on that? I'm just curious.
Oh, I am so happy to hear it. I mean, one of the things that I think we all do, well, I don't know if everybody does, but I do, is there be people that I completely, don't like, make fun of, don't approve of, but then they say something critical of me and it's like, oh, what? So why do I care? I don't like them. Why should they like me? But I think what's more important is, and this sounds really, it does sound very 60s, but I'm trying to to find the love for humanity again. I'm trying to remember that, I'm not religious, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a theist, but my God or my higher power is that thing that makes us more alike than not alike. That thing that makes human beings drawn to each other. That our natural instinct is to work together, to cooperate, to form a family, or an extended family. And I believe when you talk about the things we're talking about, economics, politics, most of us want the same things, and we have to be alert against being divided. I think even the Trump voters, I think a lot of them thought he was going to bring back jobs, or they voted for him. I mean, this isn't any brilliant insight. I think most people recognize this about, or most of this audience recognizes. People voted for Trump because they were completely fed up with politicians, and he sounded like an outsider. They, so we have things in common with them. We have things in common with the left, that's the crazy. I shouldn't say that. We have things in common with a lot of these groups, and I don't have the answer, but which differences should keep us apart? So I'll give you an example. The Medicare for all, the single payer improved Medicare for all thing. The Real Progressives is working with March for Medicare for All. March for Medicare for All has another coalition partner that is pushing for a wonderful health plan, free at point of service, nonprofit, everything you would want. But one of their principles is that we need progressive taxation to pay for it. For all the right reasons, take the burden of the cost off of the working class and put it on the rich. But March for Medicare for All won't endorse their because of that, because it implies that taxation is required to pay for nice things. And that's dangerous. So here's this group that wants everything we want, this national single payer. They want this great healthcare program, but they have one thing wrong. But it's a really important thing. So what do you do there? I mean, obviously, we don't reject them. We continue to try and talk to them, try to educate them. But you were talking about Cornel West. Obviously, we're not into presidential campaigns or political campaigns, but should we support him a little bit? Where do you draw the line? Which differences count?
Yeah.
I don't have the answers.
To me, I'm looking at it like this.
Mm-hmm.
Every time we have to go after Donnie Tiny Hands, every time we have to get everybody focused on learning about the nitty gritty of the Azov battalion, every time we have to learn the nitty gritty about something, it's taking our eyes off of the big picture of organizing. And maybe you need some fatality of sorts to organize around. Unfortunately, it seems like people need a benevolent dictator or some great man to motivate. They for whatever reason, we quote unquote need a leader. I don't know why that is. I don't like that seems to be the way it is, but apparently people can't function if there's not a leader. And that means that like anarchist solutions tend to fall away because people are desperate for the great man to save them. It means it's tough for Stalinists because you guys want a dictatorship of the proletariat. You want a benevolent dictator as well. And then you've got the others who are completely divorced from that. And they have this idea that any kind of leadership is oppression and on and on and on. It's just so much web of insanity to untangle. So many different thoughts coming together, and at the same time, we all have to live under something. Whether it be, the government's gone tomorrow and we're all running around foraging in the forest,
Mhm.
or whether or not we're living in decentralized little pods, I don't know. But the fact is that we are literally watching people once again try to convince us that you can elect somebody in a primary that the Democrats have fought in court successfully, to say we don't have any responsibility to run any kind of primary, much less abide the results, much less keep our thumb off the scale, much less give your donations to the candidate, much less any of that. We
Mhm.
can literally not run a primary and we can hand select who we want. And people try to gaslight you into saying, oh, that means we can support a primary. So you see them running out there supporting RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson.
Mhm.
And then the next one, which is equally painful, is the third party idea. Right, wrong, or indifferent, and I'm going to go wrong, and I'm going to say factually wrong, is the third party concept. The League of Women Voters no longer supports the debate stage. It's
Right.
run by the duopoly, the
Right.
Republicans and Democrats. Please explain to me why Republicans and Democrats have an interest in putting
A third
anyone
part.
on the stage
Mhm.
with them. They are the
Mhm.
gatekeepers.
Mhm.
Unless you storm that Bastille and tear it down, you've got no prayer. But yet you'll be gaslit. Oh, you just, hey,
Mhm.
I am not a fan of the People's Party. I'm dead serious. I was one of the founding folks in there hanging out,
Mhm. Mhm.
going to these things, working with the Progressive Independent Party, working with Draft Bernie for a People's Party, all
Mhm.
the rest of it.
Mhm.
And literally, I have a major problem. I mean, I interviewed Nick Branya 4 or 5 times back in the day. I was there at
Mhm.
when we supposedly handed the all the signatures to Bernie Sanders in Washington, D.C. There's pictures of me with Jimmy Dore and Tim
Mhm.
Black and Jordan and the rest of the gang in D.C. doing this. The fact of the matter is that they have no access. They don't have a path. And even if they did, the gatekeepers that run the show, the Republicans and
Mhm.
Democrats up the food chain, have no real reason to let anyone do it. You can be excited, you can take to the streets, you can fill up a stadium. But if you don't have a path forward, you don't have a path forward. And I don't think you have a path forward with the duopoly either. You can't pick your candidate. They have selected who you will vote for, and that's that. And I don't even know that the vote matters. I'm not sure if it's not just there to keep you believing that you have a say in the outcome of the world. But the reality is that I can't think anybody that said, "Hey, it'd be a great idea to have Kamala Harris and Joe Biden." Who the hell would say such an
I would
idiotic
never say
thing?
that. Mhm.
But yet there they are. So to me, I guess to put a bow on this and to kind of wrap it up, I think we've got to find a way to identify what a win is and be
Mhm.
okay with it ourselves.
Mhm.
We've got to find a win. We got to find a way to quantify what forward progress is, and reinforcing the belief that taxpayers are funding things, reinforcing the belief that we need the rich people's money to be able to do nice things for ourselves, reinforcing the austerity narratives isn't helping us reduce the deficit. Shut up. I mean, pay down the debt. Oh my God, how can you say I don't know economics any
Mhm.
clearer than what are we
Mhm.
going to do about this debt, right?
Mhm.
And so the people at the national single payer and the person that believes that suddenly, because of de-dollarization, the US government won't be able to pay for healthcare. I mean, that's a real problem.
It's a
I
real
think that's an
problem.
integrity issue, to be honest with you. Because if I don't know a subject, I don't talk about it.
Mhm.
And so if somebody has the audacity to act like they're an authority and it's good
Mhm.
de-dollarization, we're not gonna be able to pay for it, blah,
Mhm.
blah, blah.
Mhm.
I think that's a real problem. I think that's a problem that each of us as individuals needs to take to heart. If you don't understand,
Mhm.
it's important to go back to a Samuel L. Johnson quote that I really, really uh, think is super important. Samuel Johnson said, "We know a subject ourselves, or we know where to find information about it. We do not sit there and pipe off about shit we don't know. If you don't understand a fiat currency, don't tell me you're debasing the currency. You don't know
Mhm.
what you're talking about.
Mhm.
Don't do it. There's a path. Don't do it. Don't talk about things you don't know. Or if you do, ask questions. Don't speak as if. And so in the particular case of the national single payer, I mean, she went in there and like pinched a deuce right there in the community well. So now everybody is filled with the idea of de-dollarization blocking healthcare and all this other Captain Insano crap. And that polluted the well. Now, the problem is that somebody's got to have an answer for the hope that lies within and explain to her why that's absolutely batshit crazy. But that's the problem. We as a society have convinced ourselves that we don't require any study. We don't have to read anything. We don't have to understand theory. We don't have to have a political analysis. We could just say things because my opinion is as equal as your opinion, which is bullshit, by the way. But these are the things that we're up against. Everybody thinks that, hey, I got a Twitter account. That means I'm an authority. You know, hey, you know, I watched a YouTube video. I must know economics now. Your final parting words as we close out.
Well, I just want to say that I believe again that we can take advantage of any action that involves people and use it to educate. I think the Bernie campaign was a net positive, even though Bernie didn't stand a chance in hell of winning. I think a lot of young people woke up to a different way of looking at things. You know, they say democratic socialists jumped from 5,000 to 30,000 or something afterwards. Not that that's necessarily important, but what's important is that people were thinking a different way. And I don't know if this makes sense, but I'm just saying we can use the national single payer meeting I went to. Most of the people there were listening to me and to Elizabeth, and we could see them absorbing it. So it wasn't a waste. This one person who's heard her own experts saying something else, she doesn't know, she doesn't understand it. She believes she understands it. But the point is, the others listen to us. And they're open to having a meeting with you and some others. So that's it.
All right. Well, Virginia, folks, thank you for joining us on this Friday episode of The Rogue Scholar. Please check out, we've got Pavlina Chernova tomorrow for Macro and Cheese. Full employment on tap, folks. Please check it out. And without further ado, I bid you adieu. And Virginia, thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure. I got to get my ass back to work. You guys have a great weekend. We're out of here.